festa fa preparar, se trovi in piazza qualche ragazza, tegono quella cerca menar, cerca menar, senza che donne, la danzesia, il minuetto, chi la follia, chi la manna, farà velar, chi il minuetto, farà velar, chi la follia, farà velar, chi la manna, farà velar, e di frattanto l'altra canto, con questa quella uomo reggiar.
My guest today is Nic Muni, who's the director of our production of Don Giovanni. Nic, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here, and let's get started with the fact that you are the originating director of this production, as well as the designer.
That's right.
How did it come about in the first place?
It has a long history. In about 1986, I did a production of Don Giovanni at Opera Delaware, and the folks at Minnesota Opera heard about it or came to see it and liked it and wanted me to do a new version of that in Minnesota, which I did in 1988. And then it went to various companies, and then in 1999, when I was artistic director at the Cincinnati Opera, I remembered that production. We had a Don Giovanni scheduled, and we purchased it from Minnesota Opera and made a bunch of changes and refinements to it. And after 1999, it went again to, it's probably been to 8 or 9 different companies.
So, but it's a production that went through a certain number of changes.
It did,
but
it's been evolving. Yes.
Were those changes dependent on your focusing more on the piece and understanding it more as you went along?
Yeah, I mean, you know, this is a piece that you never really know, you keep learning. So, in all the, you know, the incarnations of it, new ideas have come up, new cast members, and just developing ideas on the piece.
So what's, I hate to use the word concept, but I think that's, because that's a kind of a dirty word, and that's not what I'm saying, but what is your understanding of the piece through this particular production? What are you trying to say with it?
Well, I think, first of all, I think, yes, I understand what you mean by concept being a dirty word, but you know, every production, I think it's been attached to when you do something unusual, when you take it out of period or something like that.
Exactly.
But that's not the concept of the piece. The time setting is one tool that you have at your disposal to tell the story that you believe it is. Our time setting is 18th century. I feel that's important for this piece. The second act, it gets a little less 18th century, but it's still anchored in the 18th century. I think the basic things that were important to me in this production were that it moved quickly. So the set is designed, there are absolutely 0 pauses for set changes.
Perfect. We like that in
Mozart. We like that in Mozart. And because I think the piece was written, it has, I don't know how many official scenes, but it's upwards of 16 or 17 scenes.
And that can really slow
it really slows the momentum down. So the idea was that it's in one environment that has different parts. So there'll be very different looks via certain set pieces that fly in, and lighting plays a large role. So it won't look monotonous, I guarantee you, but there won't be these long stops for scene changes.
Right.
That was one thing that was important. And the other thing that was important was a kind of a reflective quality, that the space has a lot of glossy surfaces and mirrored surfaces to sort of suggest the kind of narcissism of Don Giovanni himself, but also that he holds up a kind of a mirror to each character. He triggers emotions in them and thoughts and feelings in them that the characters around him don't know how to deal with. And so he's sort of showing them their true selves in a weird way. So there's a kind of a mirrored kind of feeling to it.
Isn't Mozart on record somewhere in a letter saying just that? That I think it was with reference to Così fan tutti. I've got this in my brain.
That rings true.
That he wanted the audience to see themselves as if they were looking in a mirror.
Yeah, I think that was Così fan tutti, because Così fan tutti was set in the present day of when Mozart and Da Ponte wrote it originally. But anyway, there's a kind of a mirrored look. There's a lot of gloss black to get this sort of Spanish intense feel to it, and very bright color. We also use reference artwork of Goya, and there's a David F reference there. So late 18th century artwork is featured. Frames are featured. There's like a motif, a visual motif of frames. There's a frame on the floor, there's a frame hanging on the ceiling, and these artworks are in frames, and then in the second half, the artwork's gone and just empty frames. And I think the frame idea for us was akin to this sort of containment of the 18th century, where things were ordered, and Don Giovanni breaks that order.
Well, it was an era, too, when the order was being broken by revolution
exactly.
and the age of reason and enlightenment, rather. And
Exactly,
all that.
exactly. And the Viva la Libertà, you know, Giovanni's, you know, I don't know if they lifted that from the Beaumarchais, probably. But this notion that Giovanni is out to not literally destroy the 18th century, but destroy the facets of the 18th century where propriety and religious laws, you know, I'm speaking for Don Giovanni, but in my view, I think he feels that causes a lot of pain to people. That this oppressive, and you know, we see it, you know, to the present day, when order becomes oppressive, that line.
Right.
And so the frames represent the kind of order, and the set eventually kind of gets destroyed in a way.
It's interesting how for the longest time, I think after the piece was written, Don Giovanni was a kind of symbol for that breaking away, a symbol for revolution and for liberty, despite the fact that he gets it in the end.
He gets it in the end.
And today we look at him as if he's a sociopath, you know, and a serial, almost a rapist, not quite, but certainly a serial womanizer.
Yeah.
And how you balance that in the piece, I think, is what still makes it provocative and controversial.
It's absolutely. I mean, you know, if you look at people like Siepi and that generation of Don Giovanni, and I mean, I wasn't alive to see performances, but you see the photographic records. A lot of times, and most of the time, Giovanni was a kind of a charming scamp,
Exactly.
kind of thing. And the more recent trend is, as you know, put it, is more of a sadistic brute, really, really dark. And I think it needs both. I think it needs that darkness. I mean, we have to believe it has to be dark enough, his character, that you feel justified that he must be sent to hell.
Well, and to my ear, the music skirts that, so it really stays on that line of, oh my God, the music is so attractive. He's attractive. Oh, wait a minute. You know, what he's doing is not attractive.
Then Finca Novino comes along, where the music, I mean, it's wrapped in a style that is beautiful 18th century.
Right.
But if you look just beyond that, Finca Novino is quite vicious, you know, rhythmically, and it's very, very intense.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. But
Well,
you got to get both of those, I think, in order
yeah.
to have a full.
Well, we had a little bit of a nervousness in the sense that we had this huge snowstorm back east,
Right.
and the set was late.
Yeah.
What, 2 days?
2 days,
Two
yeah.
days late. So, how do you feel right now in terms of like getting everything on stage and ready to go?
We have a brilliant crew and a really brilliant cast. It's going to come together. However, it is, it is nerve-wracking.
It's a lot of
and
pressure.
partly because I think the scenic environment is not static; it's always moving. And so, one of my concerns really is to make sure the cast is safe, because there are trap doors, there are walls that are sliding, there are
So much going on.
So much going on. That's really was the concern. But I mean, we're catching up.
What do you hope, as a director and as an artist, an audience member comes away from Don Giovanni feeling, not just thinking, but feeling?
Well, I mentioned this in one of our other outings. My fondest hope is that the audience feels a complex, ambiguous feeling towards Don Giovanni.
Mm-hmm.
A love-hate, if you will, not clear about him at all. And I believe that Mozart and Da Ponte, that was their intention. When I look at the text and the music, because Mozart wouldn't have given him such heroic music in the final scene had he want to paint him merely as an evil guy. So I feel that's one thing. And I think another thing I would love is if the audience is, on some level, deeply disturbed at what has happened on this night. Not just, he's a womanizer. Okay, sure, that's the sine non qua of Don Giovanni, but I think it's a lot more about the people around Don Giovanni, at least as much as Don Giovanni, and what will happen to them. And I mean, Anna, I think, she'll never be the same. You know, I don't think any of them
none
will
of those
ever
characters
be the same.
will ever be the same.
That feeling, so that slightly unsettling feeling, which I was talking to the cast about the epilogue and about the very final statement. You know, this is what happens to people who do evil. And I said to them, I think my sense is that they're so desperate for a very clear resolution that they seize onto a kind of an ancient platitude in a way, right? And they called it an antiquissimo canzone, which is the most ancient song.
Mm-hmm.
And then they quote this song, "He who does evil ends up being paid off like this." And I said to them, I said, I'm not sure they believe that, but they need to believe it.
Yeah.
They need to believe it desperately. And if you listen to the music of that final thing, it is also quite violent. It's not peaceful at all.
No,
It's
not at
not
all.
peaceful at all.
Mm-hmm.
So, those are some things.
It's interesting that after 233 years, the opera still has something very important to tell us. It's amazing.
Absolutely, yeah. It's always a thrill to work on it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure. My pleasure.